Yeah, let's hope we're really live this time.
Okay. Yeah, it looks live on the page. Face there, so that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so we're just going to hang out a bit more to give people time to join.
Mm-hmm.
Refresh the page, I think. This on it before.
Okay. In the comments.
Is anyone joined yet? Just so that we can know that it is actually working.
Right now, it's no one yet. So.
Google product that I've touched today has actually worked.
So I think we have
6. Okay. Cool. Telling me. Yeah, we are so sorry, everyone. We must have, but we started broadcasting and nothing went out, and so we've just had to make a whole new hangout. And it's like we really apologize for starting so late.
We're here and we are guests here. This is going to be great. Today we are going to have a sneak preview of the Confident Communicator course from Purnima and Karen. I'll let them introduce themselves. Purnima, why don't you start? I think we're having audio issues. Sorry.
And I am a contributor to Femgineer, which is the company that Purnima has created to help empower and encourage women in the tech industry. And this today is a review of our Confident Communicator course, which is an 8-week online course that will be starting next month. My background is I'm a technical woman, and I have been a software engineer and an executive, and today I focus on gender diversity in the tech industry and run workshops like this, as well as doing a whole bunch of other things. Purnima, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Femgineer, and before founding Femgineer, I was a founding engineer at Mint.com, and much like Karen, a technical person. And the goal of Femgineer is to help folks who are technical advance in their careers, or who are working at a tech company as well. And as Karen mentioned, we've got a course coming up today. And before we before we dig into the material today, we want to start off by just explaining what we're going to cover. And I know many of you really took the time to submit a questionnaire that we had sent out last week. Some of you might have joined recently and didn't get the questionnaire, and that's okay. But we got a lot of interesting feedback. We found out that 50% of the people who responded had given more than a handful of talks. And 50% were completely new to public speaking. And so what we have decided is to kind of keep it broad and make sure that we address both the folks who in here might be speaking a lot and some of you who might be brand new to it. And if you feel like we didn't answer one of your questions, then we'll give you plenty of time for Q&A at the end, where we'll be happy to do any one-offs. The main thing that we want to talk about today is how to pick a topic that's going to appeal to your audience, and we're going to focus on giving you some really, really tactical advice, because we know that it's after all the kind of thing that you have to do. So we will kind of cut to the chase and not keep things too high level, but give you strategies that you can actually use. And we're not going to give you. We're gonna kind of touch upon some main ones, and then again, if you have any questions, we can dive in during the Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the main things that we noticed that people kept asking us time and time again, whether they're just getting started or they've been speaking for a long time, is how do you engage an audience? And we know that that's a pretty tough question because Karen and I are constantly battling with this. And our number one go-to strategy, no matter what we do, is we always reach out to organizers, the organizers of the event, the organizers of the conference, because these are the folks who know who's going to come to their event or to their webinar or whatnot. So they have an expectation of what their audience is going to be like. And you don't have to feel like you're burning your event to go off smoothly, and they want to find the best speakers to come. So it's often good to get a sense of how many people are going to show up, what's their level, what might the venue be like, are they startup people, are they more corporate, so organizers, what kind of people are going to be there. Hesitation on their part, then they should take the time to figure out, again, if there's any changes, like the number of people shrinks or expands, pretty good sense then of who your audience is going to be. The second thing that we recommend to engaging an audience is pretty much what we did for this webinar. We sent out a survey with some questions, and that way we could anticipate what the needs are of our audience. The cool thing about doing this is you seem like you're thinking on your feet, but really you've done a lot of homework, right? You know what the audience is, questions they're going to ask. You can tailor your material to those. And then if you really get stuck and you feel like, well, I did a bunch of work at the beginning, or you show up and something changes up, or right as you're getting started, you can just do a simple, what are they looking to get out of your talk? And it's a great way to start some of that initial audience interaction. So I'm going to hand it over now to Karen, and she's going to talk about how to pick a topic that's going to appeal to your audience.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, one thing we hear from so many of the people that we work with is, why would anyone care about what I have to say? Maybe you've only been coding for a few years, or you only recently started using that framework, or maybe you're new to your role. But here's the thing. There's always someone who is less experienced, and they want to fast-track their own learning by hearing about your experience. Learn something, what you wish you had known before you started, and what would you do differently if you had to do it all over again. With that in mind, you can identify the topic that you might talk about in a talk by using something we call the inventory method, basically to expertise. The inventory method is all about taking stuff that you've worked on recently, maybe the last 6 to 12 months, and ask yourself 5 questions. First one, what problem were you solving? What was the reason for the project? What were your goals? Number 2, what were your contributions to the project? Question number 3, what challenges did you face? Was there something you got stuck on, or that your team got stuck on? What hurdles did you have to address the problem? Number 4, what did you learn, and how did you go about learning it? When you were faced with learning a new technology, that programming language, market segment, that career skill, how did you get started? Did you take a class? Did you have a favorite website or book that was very helpful to you? So take inventory of that. And then question number 5, what advice do you have for people who might be faced with a similar project? What do you wish you had known before you started? What would you do differently if you had to do it all over again? What are your costs? So once you've done this inventory method and you have answers to all these questions, we then recommend something called the talk topic test, which is a little bit of a mouthful. But the talk topic test is all about identifying the audience persona. Who are they? What's their motivation for attending? What experience do they have? Next, identify the takeaways. Maybe 3 or 5 takeaways, key things that you want them to learn from your talk. You might think of these in terms of what would you want them to remember, what do you want them to remember about your talk, or what would you want them to tell a friend, even what would you want them to tweet. Those are all sort of takeaway types of things. And then lastly, in the talk topic test, anticipate the audience's needs. And yes, you can anticipate what they're going to ask and address some of them in your talk ahead of time. What you do is, by working through the topic test, you can share some of it, share it with your coworkers or friends or family members, and ask them about their questions about the content, and then work those into your talk. So you basically address them ahead of time. And just briefly, let me explain how I use the talk topic test and these audience questions in a recent keynote I gave. My talk was all about turning risk into opportunity. Number one I did was think about my audience persona. So my target audience was technical women who wanted strategies for taking more risks in their career. Number two, what was their motivation? I set the context of why women tended to avoid risk in their careers. While it's risky not to take risks, to keep doing what you've always done. And I drew an analogy to what happened to Blockbuster back when Netflix disrupted the video rental industry. They kept doing what they changed and they became obsolete. So that was listening to my talk. Number three, what was the level of the audience? Well, as I did my talk topic test pre-work, I realized that women at all stages of their career were finding the topic interesting. So I set my level broadly. Technical women at any stage of their career. Number four, what were the takeaways I wanted the audience to have? Well, what I did was I collected stories from a handful of technical women who had taken big risks with their career. As I shared the stories I collected with my friends, I took notes of the questions. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. I collected these stories from the women who had taken the big risks and what they had done to evaluate or mitigate risks. And then I abstracted the stories and the approach they took and turned these into my takeaways. And number five, I anticipated the audience's needs. I shared these stories with some friends, got their questions, and then I basically worked into my talk ways to address their questions before they even had a chance to ask them. So that's an example of using the talk topic test. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Purnima, who's going to talk about what's really important to your audience. How do you find that out? And how do you figure out what they don't really want to hear about? Purnima.
Thanks, Karen, for giving us a good example of the inventory method and the talk topic test. Before I get into this next section, I know a lot of you are wondering how to ask questions. So if you do have some questions, then I recommend using the hashtag TechSpeak, T-E-C-H, and then speak, S-P-E-A-K. Or you can just do @TechSpeak. Sorry, we're having a little bit of trouble with Google Air today, but we will be happy to answer your questions. So again, hashtag TechSpeak Digest. Or is the hashtag still valid?
No, that is good.
Perfect. So hashtag I said TechSpeak.
Yep, and we're also monitoring the last page. So
okay. Okay, no worries. So yeah, hopefully you guys will have questions. I'll remind you again when we get to the Q&A session. So, as Karen mentioned, what I want to talk about next is you're probably thinking, what's really important to your audience and what do they absolutely not care about? So as technical folks, we tend to get really in our code and the latest and greatest thing that we've built, and we think that that's what people want to also look at and learn from. But that's actually, I can't remember people left because I got it. What they actually were engaged in was when I would do talks that focused on problems that were universal or perhaps really, really popular. So for example, when I was at Mint, I gave this talk on how to go from a prototype and scale the architecture to more of a services-oriented architecture. And when I did this, they saw the problem as one that they would also experience, especially if they were in a startup and then growing. But two, I would share some of the examples of the technologies I use. Like I would say, we used RabbitMQ and Spring Beans, but I didn't put any code up there. And that helped to kind of focus the talk around the problem itself and keep people really engaged. Now you're probably wondering, well then, what do I do with all those code snippets and all the material that I have created? Is if you do have a super detailed talk, like one where you go along and actually go back and do tutorials, then those should actually be workshops. Maybe 1 hour to 3 hours long, and you sit there with people and walk them through, the setup and then how to actually write the code or execute it. But those are not what to call, either lightning talks or long-form talks, so keep those to the end. Now, the other technique that we like to talk about, or strategy rather, for figuring out what's really important to your audience is what we like to call the upfront ask strategy. And basically what that means is as people start walking into your talk, this is not the time for you to pick up your phone and start looking at your email. This is the time to actually greet people that are walking in and just ask them, hey, thanks for coming out to my talk. What's like the 1 or 2 things that you really care about? What got you interested? Why are you here? And write them down, right? It's really important to write them down. And the reason you want to write them down is because then you know what's important to them and it reminds you. The other reason it's really cool is that it shows people you care, right? They're coming to your talk. They're not thinking of this as like, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to waste the next 45 minutes of my life. Wow, this person actually wants to talk about or thinks about what I care about. That's great. The second thing is, like I said, when you write, then if you're worried about your talk being too long or too short or not knowing where to focus your time, you can just glance down on your paper, or what I like to do is often write it on a, and the benefit of doing this is, again, you can point to that part and then say, so I'm just going to cross this off, or it looks like we've covered this. But it's a good way, to, again, to get some audience interaction and to know where to spend more time and less time on other things. Now, the other thing is, if you don't have time to cover some of those areas, that's a great way to segue into the Q&A, right? I'm sure a lot of you have had those Q&As where there's just crickets, right? So instead of having those crickets, this is a great way that you can say, hey, let's just start with the first question. Looks like I didn't answer number 5. My friend in the blue shirt in the 3rd row asked this. Let's start with that. So it's a good way to warm the audience up and, again, engage them. And one of the biggest benefits of all is that you're going to be blindsided, right? You know what the audience cares about when you use the upfront ask strategy, and most of the time the questions that they have in Q&A are just going to be extensions of those. So it's a great way to get the ball rolling. And then the final benefit, I will say, is it engages them early on, which means that you avoid having a tough audience, right? Because you know what, and you've written it down, on the board. One additional tactic I like to do is when I get to that point, in case it's a longer talk, like a 40-minute talk, I will actually say, so, the third point here, my friend, the blue shirt in the 3rd row mentioned this. Did I answer your question adequately, or do you want me to cover this in a little more detail? You can make the talk more interactive. So, highly recommend the upfront ask strategy for those of you that are wondering what's really important to your audience and what do they not care about. So, I'm going to hand it to Karen, and she's going to wrap up with our final strategies for Q&A.
Yep. Thanks, Purnima. And I'll also say about the upfront ask strategy, because as I meet people who are coming into the room, it helps calm my nerves. If I'm feeling a little nervous and I don't do that, maybe with my phone, trying to distract myself, but I end up just sitting alone and getting a little bit more nervous than I need to be. And by actually walking around, it actually makes me feel a lot more calm. It takes my mind off about getting onto that stage. So we highly recommend that for so many reasons. Now, in the survey that we ran ahead of time for this webinar, many of you asked about strategies for answering difficult questions. I think that's such a big fear, is people just are so afraid that they're going to get a question they can't answer. Now, we covered this topic pretty fully in our complete course, The Confident Communicator, offering online next month. So in today's webinar, though, we wanted to just talk about one of our strategy teach, and that is what we call the crowd strategy. What happens basically is when you get a tough question and you do not know the answer to it, it is so fine, perfectly reasonable to say, I don't know. Can anyone in the audience answer that question? Often someone in the audience will have an answer and they will share it, and then the added benefit is that you end up not only getting that question answered, but you end up engaging the audience even more in your talk, because there are people who feel like, oh, I get to be involved and help teach this crowd about this topic. So we highly recommend that crowdsourced strategy as sort of like the last resort. If you really don't know the answer to the question, turn it over to the crowd. So Purnima, do you want to give a quick review of what we've covered, and then we'll start the Q&A?
Yeah. So we wanted to kind of give you a peek of some of the strategies, and in the interest of time, to do a recap so that you have plenty of time to ask us our questions. So let's do a quick recap. We're going to be in your audience, and what kind of audience you're going to have is to reach out to your organizers. Don't feel shy. I know Kate can attest to the fact that I reached out to her probably every day for the last month, just asking about who's going to show up, how many people are we going to have, what are their interests, are they technical, are they non, how many of them have given talks, etc. And she wanted to have a good webinar, so certainly was open to answering all of my questions in depth. So feel like you can do the same with your organizers. The second strategy we shared with you is running a survey, sending out a really brief questionnaire to get people to open up about what's important to them, even have some free responses so that people get a chance to ask a few questions, and it gives you a sense of what they will end up asking in the future. It also gives you a chance to see if there's a lot of polarization, like we did in this case, where there were 50% of the people who knew a lot about public speaking, and some of you who, the other 50% who were new to it. So it gives you a chance to figure out what to focus on. And then the final around that we said is when you show up, and if there's been a change for any reason, then just using a simple show, how many of you have used Java, how many of you recently, right, gives you a sense of what the audience is like. And then the second thing we talked about when it comes to picking a topic that's going to appeal to your audience is to use the inventory method. And Karen shared 5 questions to ask yourself to figuring out what was a recent project that you can extract some of your expertise. And then use the talk topic test. Can you turn a conversation into a test and gauge if that's interesting to somebody? Then we talked about when it comes to appealing to an audience, what do they care about and what do they not care about? And I mentioned that if you get too technical, if you start showing a lot of code or trying to walk people through too many steps, then they just get bored and they zone out. So if you're going to do something like that, save it for a workshop, and instead try to focus on a problem that may be universal or very popular and speak to that, and then showcase the technologies you used to give them a sense, but don't go too in depth because they'll get bored, or they'll be like, oh, I'm front end, or I'm back end, or I'm a designer, right? So keep it a little more high level. And then we mentioned also to really people care about when they're there in front of you as they're walking in the door is to do the upfront ask. And I listed out about 5 benefits to doing this. And again, this is really meant to engage your audience and to figure out what's really important to them as you're speaking and where to spend your time. And then the final, Karen mentioned the crowdsource strategy. If you don't know a question, it's totally okay to say, hey, who in the audience the answer? Share. And then I like to do one more thing, which is I like to give the person who answered the question just a little credit. Because what ends up happening then is somebody else is like, ooh, I want credit too. I'm going to answer the next question that she doesn't know. Nice little competition, friendly competition after all, but it deflects a lot of the attention off of you, and it makes the room a lot more energized, and they actually start to form little friends afterwards. So that's the end of our talk. I just want to mention again that this is us scratching the surface of our course. We're going to go into greater detail on a number of these topics in our 8-week course, the Confident Communicator course. Registration for it will begin next week, and it'll be open through the entire week. Kate's going to send out the information for it, so don't worry. And then we will start May 4th, and it'll go to June 26th. And if you're curious about what other topics we're going to cover, we're going to talk about how to get over stage fright. We're going to talk about how to handle those tough audiences and hecklers. We're going to talk about how do you engage an audience with storytelling and body language and vocal inflections. We'll also get into presenting with stunning slides. For those of you who might be curious how to present on different mediums, right? The course will be self-study. There's going to be plenty of exercises with each lesson to give you practice, and you'll record yourself performing, and then Karen and I each week will review it and give you feedback. You'll also get feedback from your peers, which we think is one of the most valuable aspects of the course, because a lot of these folks are going to be similar to your actual audience, right? They're going to be people who are techies as well, and it gives you a chance to practice in a safe and a friendly environment. And finally, is 2 talks totally fleshed out, 1 lightning talk and 1 long-form talk along with slides. And just for, I'm going to offer you a $200 discount for the first 10. You'll have to sign up pretty quickly. And again, Kate will send out the information. And our final, and of course, if you have any need to get approval from your boss or your manager, then just shoot us an email and we can handle that too. And then our final ask is, we posted today on Product Hunt, so if you'll take a minute to upvote for the Confident Communicator course, we'd really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop here and turn it over to questions. And it looks like
we have our first question. Yeah, we do. So it's, I have topics to speak on, but where do I speak? Lauren, I think you wanted to take that one.
Sure. It's a great question, and I'll do a plug for Kate and Chiu-Ki's newsletter. I mean, if you're not already subscribed to Technically Speaking Digest, you should. It's a weekly newsletter where they point out some great conference opportunities, and they, I believe your rule of thumb too is to make sure there's a code of conduct for these opportunities, and ideally they're going to reimburse you nothing for your travel fees. So it's a great list that they've curated. Thank you. There's also a couple other resources I'll mention. I'm just have my notes here in front of me. Suzanne Axtell, who works for O'Reilly Publishing, has a Google page, a Google group called Technical Women Speak. Request to join that, and there's a lot of good sharing of ideas of places you could speak. There's also a wiki called Wiki CFP, Call for Proposals, CFP, and it's a site with up-to-date listings of calls for proposals, papers in science and tech fields, and you can search for things like if you have expertise in databases, you can search for that, or software testing or something like that. It has, it's really pretty rich. Always set your own Google alert up for, you know, a lightning talk or an unconference or some content that you want to be database conference. You can set up a Google alert and get daily notifications of what is being announced that you could join in on. Hope that helps.
Yeah, a couple more additions. Local meetups, they are always looking for people, and it doesn't even have to be something for 2-3 minute talk or even just a simple pitch. But a lot of times meetup organizers are just desperate for speakers, so I think that's another great place to look. All right, are we ready for our
Chiu-Ki, you're
ready for our
all right, you were just seeing my mouth moving. I was asking the second question from our audience. So, how would you apply the techniques for online community building, like technical blogging? So, how do you apply?
So let me make sure I get this. I'm assuming that they're asking that you want to speak and blog about what you're speaking about. I'm a little confused about this question.
Well, we only got it from Twitter, so
okay.
Unless he tweet right away to follow up.
How would you
as well, like how does your blogging and speaking, how can they complement each other?
Sure. Yeah, we can answer that because Karen and I do that quite a lot. And so, you know, to blogging or speaking, one thing we highly recommend is that you take your content, if it's a talk that you've given and it was recorded, then put it on your blog. If it wasn't recorded, then at least the highlights and the slides. And I like to at least do it in a few formats because not everybody wants to watch a long talk, not everybody wants different mediums. So certainly take your talk and put it on your blog for sure. Karen, do you have any?
Yes, to talk about is that I blog a lot, and so oftentimes when I've written something and I see it get like a lot of traction online, then I think, well, maybe I should build a talk out of this. So recently I published this post on like how to be a good interviewer, and like that got shared so widely that now I'm like, okay, I should put together a talk. Like, so I'm starting to work on that with like a working title of challenging steps to being a better interviewer.
Nice.
And I'll add too, we just shared today in the webinar about identifying your audience, their persona, the takeaways, all of those types of things. Oh, you should apply that to writing as well. If you are writing a blog, it's a great discipline to follow to make sure that you are clear in your mind as you are writing who you're reaching out to, who's that person at the other end that you're expecting to read, and what you want to learn about your topic. So totally think that that's transferable as well.
Great. Yeah.
Amazing. So let's move on to the question. So
it's
this
so perfect. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's great. How do you handle not understanding an audience question to everyone else except you?
Yeah, so I think that was just what we had just now. And because of the delay, it makes it a little more of a challenge. Certainly, if you're on Twitter, I'm certainly going to follow up with the person who asked the question on Twitter because I saw his tweet. So certainly following up. I think the second thing, and I think this is a pro tip. Whenever somebody asks the question, always repeat it, because a lot of times when you say it out loud, you might understand it a little. And okay to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. Maybe I'm just having an off day. Can you rephrase it? And have them rephrase it, especially if it's one of those where people do a run-on sentence, or you might always okay to ask them. And then again, if you feel like it's just really hard, you can't understand it, and everyone else in the audience understands, then put it out to the audience again. I think we get kind of nervous that this is going to show that we're idiots or we don't know, but we're not experts, and it's oftentimes better to just own up to what you don't know and let the audience take it from there.
And also, to Purnima, sometimes there is a strong accent that you're with and you can't quite parse what the person is asking because of their accent. Some chances are someone else in the audience will be able to know what they're saying because they're more familiar with that person's accent or that style of speaking. So by understand you, can you rephrase it or something like that? Chances are if someone else just gets it, they'll stand up and just rephrase it for you in their language, and hopefully there won't be the accent. Just be honest, like, I don't understand what you're asking, and can you rephrase it, restate it, whatever.
Perfect. Oh, okay, so the question after that, we will include a link to get in touch with us, or our email address, and you can contact us and let us know how many people you were thinking of bringing, and we're certainly happy to give you a volume discount for that.
We don't have any more questions. We just have a nice comment, and much as I love nice comments, we could use more questions. So people get asking on either Tweeters, TechSpeak Digest, or hashtag TechSpeak, or just in the G+ event, and we'll pick you up.
Well, then I'm going to take advantage and ask my question. But people who are listening, please ask questions, because this is a great chance to be able to get direct answers from our great speakers here. My question actually is something that I face myself, which is when I speak at a technical conference, like that, maybe do a show of hands in the beginning, and then I discover that that's a very wide spectrum. Some people know the technology like the back of their hand, and some people walk in because they thought this is interesting and don't really have a good foundation of what I'm going to be talking about. So how do you actually then on the spot cater the material that you prepared maybe a week in advance to this particular question that you just asked, right? Because you gather the information, how do you use that on the spot?
Yeah. So just to make sure, are you asking if the audience changes or if the audience needs are different than what you anticipated?
Ask people, how many of you have written Hello World in Android?
Oh, okay.
And then I asked how many of you have actually changed the text styling in Android, and then the talk is going to be about how you change text, right? And then so that's kind of usually it's on what I expected. Sometimes it's a little bit off. Like, oh, actually nobody knows about this. So how do I slow down in the beginning so that I can get them up to speed enough so that the rest of the material will make some sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we always recommend is in the proposal, if there are prerequisites, to list it. So something as simple as, if you're taking this course, then you should have at least built a Hello World app in Android, or you should at least know Java, or you should at least know what Android is, but whatever you feel is the most basic knowledge for people to have, mentioning that in the proposal so that as people are looking at summary, and whatever the prerequisites are, they can self-identify as, oh yeah, I built a Hello World app. That's me, or I haven't. Maybe it's not like the place to go. Maybe I should go attend the talk that's on how to build a Hello World app, right? But that can oftentimes help. Do you do that, by the way? I feel like you probably do.
I don't do that like every time, but a lot of the conferences actually ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I face that a lot more at meetup situations.
Okay.
Where there's no other tracks for them to go to, and this is a regular thing that they just like to come happening.
Yeah.
So the audience tend to be a lot more diverse at the meetup setup rather than the conference setup.
Now the other is if I get a lot of disparity in the audience, then what I will say is, it looks like I did today, it looks like there's a lot of difference in terms of the levels and experience. So, I want to make sure to get everybody on the same page. So for those of you who are advanced, just bear with me for the first 5 minutes. I'm going to cover a few of the basics, and then we'll dive into the advanced strategies that everybody will be on course with. And that's up to you as the speaker if that's what you want to do. But a lot of times, even advanced people, they'll be like, oh, I didn't know that. So they always walk away with a couple nuggets. And if you do it in a way that's graceful, right, you're asking them like, just please be patient with me, then those who are patient will stick around, and those who are like, to the same level, if you can. If it's too advanced, then again, I think your best bet is to learn from that and try to include it in the prerequisites. I think Karen had something. Karen, did you want to add to this?
Said Purnima is, at some point you don't want to dilute your talk too much. If it is such a broad range and you are aiming to give a presentation to very advanced people, you want to stay pure to that, because otherwise no one's going to get anything out of it if you're trying to cater too much. So I think you need to make the call about your content, how familiar you are maybe with doing a Hello World on iOS versus maybe bridge some gaps in information, saying this is just like doing this in iOS if you're familiar with that. But if you're not that comfortable with it, you got to just stick with what you know too. So I think it's a very much the answer to the question today is it depends.
Okay, so I have a question. How do you feedback from your talks? How do you decide what do you want to keep and what do you want to just kind of discard? Because one thing that I found is, for example, I had that exact problem recently of the kind of different ranges of knowledge. I'd written this talk and content for kind of people UI code on iOS, and then I discovered that so many people don't test at all that like my audience for that was going to be so limited. So then I had to basically add like a beginner section for how do you write beginner unit tests. And then the feedback I get is, you didn't run this in a very standard way. And if you think I could have done that, then that's actually a good sign, because there's no way I could have. Plenty of that is a lot more nuanced and sometimes very gendered. And so how do you say, I'm going to ignore this piece of feedback because it's not actually going to make me a better speaker, it's just going to make me insecure.
Yeah, I think you might have answered your question, Kate. Do that. In a related sense, I heard someone speak about a year ago who is pretty public, and she's interviewed by a lot of press, and she said, "I never read the comments because they can be mean-spirited. They often can make you second guess what you feel you already knew, or that your strategy or your vision or whatever you were being, or you felt very confident. As soon as people start picking it apart, it's hard to retain that confidence. And so her rule of thumb is never read the comments. And so not that I want to say that that's necessarily the right case all the time, and maybe not if you're trying to improve a talk and give it multiple times and make improvements each time. But I think you need to be selective with sticking to your guns about what you believe is the right approach to teaching something, sharing your knowledge, getting your point across, versus being open to, yeah, that does. I should add that improvement. I have an example of feedback I got after a talk recently, which was it was again back on this idea of how to embrace more risk in your professional career. And one idea and one concept and one of my takeaways: if you want to move to a different city, maybe you can go there for an extended vacation and take a sabbatical from work and go try out living in that other city before you commit to it full time. And the feedback was basically this woman saying, well, that's not something most of us have the doing, is taking a sabbatical and living somewhere else. And so it was like, it was a good point, and it made me realize, well, I don't have to have it just be a sabbatical, but it could be doing something off unpaid and go travel to that other place or live that life that you're imagining. So I was able to incorporate it without losing sight of what I really wanted to be. So I think you need to get creative with these things.
Yeah. The other thing I'll add to that is getting started and you want feedback like from your peers, from your supervisors, or whoever. We actually have this one recommendation in our course, which is if somebody gives you feedback, because I can only give a 5-minute lightning talk, and if I add what you're doing, that forces them to think about, is that essential? Is that important, or will it detract? Or are they just asking something that's only pertinent to their particular situation, right? So don't hesitate to hold the feedback giver a little bit accountable. And so try that, or add and then remove technique. So that's the only addition I'm gonna suggest, because I think everyone's covered the rest.
Yeah. So there was a question that came in through email who said, how can I handle nervous talking in the first 5 minutes of my speech? Oh my gosh, this is a big topic, and is something that we address in our longer course. One thing is techniques for getting over stage fright, which we cover. But the other thing I'll just add quickly, because we don't have a lot of time here, is it has a whole host of problems if you do that. We do recommend memorizing the first 10, 15, 20 seconds, the first couple of sentences you might have, because if you are feeling nervous, if you can just get those first few sentences in mouth in a very cohesive fashion, you've chosen your words well, you're off strong, you often start to relax into it and move on from there. So that's just a teaser of of an idea that we recommend for getting over that very initial set of nerves.
Nice. There was one question for that, and I'll go and answer it. It was, I'm looking for more opportunities to practice speaking. Will this course help? Every single lesson, and there's about 15 lessons in total, 15, 1-5, not 50, actually speak. And you're going to record yourself, you're going to upload the recordings, Karen and I are going to look at them and give you feedback, and then it's rinse and repeat. Do not worry, you will have so much practice, because we really want you to be polished by the end. And of course, you'll share this with the peers in the course, so you'll get some feedback from them, but it'll really give you a chance to practice. And like I said before, you're going to practice just one topic. We'll have you pick one talk, about 5 to 7 minutes, and then a longer form talk, 20 to maybe 45 minutes, slides as well as a proposal. So yes, our goal is to make this hands-on and get you to practice, but to also make sure that we're following up with.
So going to be practicing lessons will require you to practice in front of not a mini audience effect going on. It's uncomfortable and it's scary, but it makes such a difference to your public speaking skills, and that's why we will be leading you through this.
I believe there was a follow-up on the blogging versus speaking.
Right.
Yeah, he asked, are you going to cover only speaking at conferences or meetup, and are there other ways?
Yeah, so an internal presentation at your company, you can apply to a meetup, you can apply to a small conference, a TED Talk, whatever we're going to give you, and then, like I said, we'll have you practice a long form and a short form that says, the different situations that you might be in, whether it's internal or a public event. Yeah, I can answer. So the next question is, how much is the course? So the course is, and we're only advertising it here on this webinar, we'll get $200 off. So again, Kate will send out that link. If you want to get your company to sponsor it, then we're happy to send invoice or do whatever it is that you need to. And then again, we have a volume pricing discount. So if you want to multiple people from your organization, happy to chat about that as well.
I think I'll wrap this up. Thank you so much, Purnima and Karen. There was so much good stuff in the webinar. And sorry, everybody, that we had so much technical issues with your questions and having to switch hangouts. So thank you so much for bearing with us. We are going to send out an email with links to the course and also other resources mentioned, like the newsletter that you may or may not have heard of that will help you become a better speaker. So, and thank you so much again. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.